Hello, xin chào mọi người. Okay, so today I want to tell you about how I learned Vietnamese. And there have been a lot of people ever since we started this YouTube channel asking, like, how do you learn Vietnamese? And so I want to tell you the story of where that started, how long I've been learning, and kind of the things I've done to get my Vietnamese sounding better. So hopefully this is helpful not only for you to practice listening to English, but also so you can learn how learning another language might be. For example, if I say something about how I learned Vietnamese, you will be able to apply it to how you learn English. And it should be all around helpful. So here we go, let's start. So I've been studying Vietnamese for about 3 years now. I started back in 2021 before I started working as a volunteer for my church. So that was a big reason that I started learning Vietnamese. But I would say that I started learning even before that, but I didn't really start studying until 2021. So the reason I say I've been learning it for longer than that is because my dad, when he was about my age, he also volunteered for our church, and he learned Vietnamese, but he spoke Vietnamese in Canada. So he went and served in Canada and taught people there and learned Vietnamese there. And when he got back and started his family, he decided he didn't want to forget Vietnamese, so he started practicing it with us, his kids.
Cường hân hái rằng sẽ có thêm một em bé mới không? Chúng ta sẽ đặt tên em bé là gì?
I still like David James Weeble.
Phải không?
Yes. Is that right?
Đúng rồi, David James Weeble.
And so he would speak in pretty much only Vietnamese all throughout my time of growing up. So while I was growing up, I found that I was able to understand a lot of Vietnamese, but I wasn't able to speak or write or read anything. Once I reached 2021, where I was about to volunteer for my church, I started learning Vietnamese for real. And kind of the way that that works is once you get assigned where you're going to serve and what language you will serve in, then you go to a training center, a place where you can learn how to teach people as well as how to speak the new language that you're going to be speaking. So I met in a group of about 13 other people that were going to be serving Vietnamese speaking. And we had a teacher that was half Vietnamese, half American, and he had also served in Vietnam, so he was able to teach us how to speak Vietnamese. So we had 9 weeks where we were being trained in how to speak Vietnamese, how to teach people, and how to be the most use as volunteers. We spent a lot of time learning basic vocabulary, basic phrases, how to have conversations with people, how to introduce ourselves, how to share what we did. It was all pretty basic things, and we would memorize a lot of these little phrases like, hello, how are you? My name is, what do you do for work? Those kinds of things. And at the beginning, that was very helpful because I was able to learn phrases that I could use. We also worked on pronunciation, so we went through the entire Vietnamese alphabet and learned what letters made what sounds and kind of the rules of pronunciation and kind of the things that might change here and there depending on what word you're saying. And this was all new to me, so it was very exciting. But the thing that was interesting is that the dialect that they taught in this training center was the Southern dialect. But I grew up listening to the Northern dialect. So my dad speaks the Northern dialect. My older brothers also speak Vietnamese. They speak the Northern dialect. And because of that, I felt like as part of our tradition, our family tradition, I should also learn Northern. So they were teaching me Southern, but I had to figure out how to speak Northern. So some of the pronunciation was a little bit different, but we were all working together to figure out how to speak Vietnamese. We were all a bunch of people that didn't really know anything about Vietnamese or didn't know a ton about how to speak it. So we spent 9 weeks doing that. We were learning pronunciation, grammar, and a few phrases. And then from there, what I found was very helpful when I left the training center and I started serving in the States, in America, because I couldn't get a visa to go to Vietnam. I spent 16 months in the States trying to learn Vietnamese on my own because I didn't have anyone else really that I could practice with. So kind of the things that I would do every day was I would study for 1 hour. And part of that 1 hour study session, I would start by doing the ma drill, where I go through all the tones like ma, 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 ma. And I would do that in a certain order. And then that was kind of how I would practice the accents, the tones, so that I wouldn't sound like an American speaking Vietnamese. I don't know if it worked. Hopefully it did, but I would do that every day to start off so I could warm myself up. And then once I had practiced the tones and figured those out, then I would start reading in Vietnamese. And towards the beginning, it was really hard. I couldn't read very fast. I read really slow and I didn't understand anything. So it was really hard for me to really enjoy that part of my study. But I think it was one of the most useful things for me. I would read out loud for about 30 minutes. And the best part about reading out loud for me was it was a way to, one, improve my comprehension, improve how much I understood, two, improve my pronunciation because I was reading out loud, and three, learn new vocabulary because these were all words that I had never learned before, I haven't seen before. And I've found that over time, I've been able to understand a lot more. I can read a lot more fluently now. My pronunciation, I think, is pretty decent. It's not perfect, but it's getting there. And I think that's because I spent so much time practicing reading out loud, because that was one of the big things that helped my pronunciation, because I was practicing those words every single day. So that was where I would start. I would do the ma drill, then I would practice reading out loud. And then after that, I would, depending on the day, I would look up new vocabulary words and write them in my little notebook, and I would look through them and review the words that I had learned before. But once I'd done that, I think the second most important thing that I did was I started practicing having conversations. And I think this is a big problem with people that are learning languages in general, is they might be able to learn a lot of vocabulary and be able to understand a lot, but they can't speak. And I found that I'm very similar in that way. So this was a very valuable part of my study sessions, my language studies. I would take time to give myself a situation or a scenario that I could practice speaking. So I would say, okay, have a conversation where you meet someone for the first time. So I would practice that. I would say, hello, how are you doing? All these things. Or I would say, okay, you met someone at the store and you want to ask them what's something cool to do in this area that you're in. So I would practice doing that. Or I would say, tell me about your favorite hobby. And I would have to explain whatever my favorite hobby was in Vietnamese. And towards the beginning, it was so difficult. It was like almost impossible because I didn't have enough vocabulary. But the thing about it was, while I was trying to speak, I was figuring out where there was gaps in my knowledge, where there were things that I wish I knew that I didn't know yet. So I would have to learn those grammar principles or learn those vocabulary words so that I could keep going and keep learning. And I feel like that part of my study pushed me even further to learn more Vietnamese so that I could explain myself how I wanted to, be able to feel natural while I'm explaining things in Vietnamese. So yeah, that was my daily study. I would do that for 1 hour every day. I would do the drills so I could practice tones and pronunciation, and then I would read so I could learn new vocabulary words, understand more, figure out how to write in Vietnamese as well so I could be comfortable with the words. And also, I would give myself conversation practice. So I was getting a wide spread of all the things that I would need to know to be able to communicate well in Vietnamese. I'm still not perfect at it, but that's why we keep studying. So my study since I stopped working as a volunteer has kind of changed a little bit because I don't have as much time to devote, as well as I'm not living in Vietnam, so it's a little harder to find the motivation to study every day. So what my language study looks like now is I don't really use this book as much as I used to. I think I put this word down like a couple weeks ago, bằng chữ cái, the alphabet, I guess. I don't know. I have not been super consistent about learning new vocabulary and trying to memorize new stuff. I think mostly I've been trying to maintain what I already know. But also I have been learning a little bit while running this YouTube channel. I've been able to translate a lot of the subtitles and learn new words through that. So that's been helpful. So it's a little bit different, but it's just another way to study the language. And now I don't have as much time, so I don't read as much as I used to, but I do try to read at least a couple times a week. If not every day, at least 3 to 4 times a week. I'll open up something in Vietnamese and I'll read it out loud. And the out loud part is so important. That is so big for me because that's where I get most of my speaking practice. It's not like conversational speaking, but it's where I can practice saying the words right and making sure they sound natural and flow well. So even if I'm reading for only 5 minutes, that's enough. That'll help me to maintain and keep my Vietnamese up. And then I think the other thing that's different from when I was a volunteer is now I spend a lot more time listening to Vietnamese than I used to. And part of that is because I live in America, so I don't have Vietnamese people around me all the time, so I can practice listening and having conversations. So I find myself listening to podcasts in Vietnamese. One of the ones that I listen to the most right now is from Viet, it's Have a Sip. So I listen to that one a lot. It's fun. I enjoy listening to those because I get to hear a lot of different people's perspectives. And also I get to hear different dialects of Vietnamese. So when I lived in Vietnam, I only served in the South. So I was only down there. So I didn't get to hear very much Northern. So it's kind of fun to mix it up and hear different accents and different ways that people say things. And then outside of that, other than reading a little bit, working on the YouTube channel, and listening to podcasts, I will practice speaking with my family. I'll try to speak as much Vietnamese with my dad as I can because he speaks really good Vietnamese. And it's a good chance for both of us to be able to practice our language and be able to learn and grow and understand more of this awesome language. So yeah, hopefully this has been helpful for you. Hopefully you've enjoyed hearing kind of my process for learning Vietnamese. I'm sure when Quoc gets back, then we'll be able to talk more about that and we can share more if you have other questions about how we learn Vietnamese and how you can learn English in the same ways. And yeah, chúc may mắn học tiếng Anh nha.